Have you ever wondered why you keep getting hurt even when you swear you're stronger? Why, even after years, a word, a gesture, or silence still hurts as if it touched an open wound? Maybe you believe you need to protect yourself better. Maybe you think that with more self-confidence, no one will be able to hurt you anymore. But let me suggest something radical. It's not you who is weak. It's your unconscious mind that is still fighting ghosts you refuse to see. You don't need shields. You need mirrors. Because what keeps hurting you is not the other person. It's what you repeat. It's what you hide from yourself. And I'm here to show you that the pain you feel is not an emotional failure. It's a psychological symptom, a muffled cry from parts of you that have been silenced for a long time. So if you have the courage, stay. I don't promise comfort, but I do promise clarity. And believe me, awareness can be more liberating than any revenge or overcoming. Let's enter this dark and soul-revealing territory together. Because if you understand this, nothing and no one will ever have the power to hurt you again. Let's start with an image. A child who, when reaching out to be welcomed, encounters silence, coldness, or contempt. That child learns early on that love comes with pain, that affection requires performance, that presence depends on obedience. And this primitive association between bond and wound does not disappear with time. It becomes your way of loving, your way of reacting, the unconscious choices you make. You repeat the scene not because you want to suffer, but because you want, this time, to change the ending. What we call self-sabotage is actually a desperate attempt by the unconscious to repair what hurt you. But the unconscious is like a blind director. It repeats the same play with the same actors, expecting a different ending. And what happens? You get hurt again. But you think it was the other person, and you continue to believe that you just need to find someone better, be stronger, more detached. When, in fact, you just need to look back. This pattern is not weakness. It is repetition. And repetition is the return of the repressed. Everything that was not digested, felt, or named in childhood returns in the form of choices, symptoms, silences. It is no coincidence that you always get involved with emotionally unavailable people. It is not bad luck that friendships break when you need them most. It's not fate that you feel alone, even when surrounded by people. It's your unconscious, trying to show you something, but we don't listen. Because we were taught to shut up, move on, win. And so we shield ourselves. We create masks, the strong, the detached, the always busy, that don't care anymore. But every mask has cracks. And all it takes is a gesture, an absence, a criticism, and everything collapses. Because the pain that hits us is not new. It is an old, pent-up, displaced pain. It is a childhood wound, activated by a current trigger. You feel that someone has destroyed you. In reality, that person has only touched a spot that was destroyed long ago. What hurts so much is not the present. It is the unconscious memory of abandonment, rejection, humiliation. And as long as you do not access this source, you will remain vulnerable. You will continue to give power to people who have no power, but who activate what lies dormant within you. That's why true protection isn't about avoiding the world. It's about integrating what you've pushed out of yourself. It's about naming what you've denied. It's about owning what you feel, even if it seems childish, exaggerated, irrational. Because the unconscious doesn't care about logic. It's driven by emotions, fantasies, traumas. And here lies the key. As long as you reject your wounded parts, you will continue to hurt yourself. Because what is rejected within returns from without. You project, repeat, attract. And you believe it is bad, luck, and it is the world against you. But in fact, it is you against yourself. An ego that struggles to appear well-adjusted against an ID that just wants to be heard. A superego that says, swallow it, get over it, against an inner child who is still crying. This conflict between desire, morality, and reality is the engine of psychological suffering. And it cannot be resolved with motivational phrases or empowerment mantras. It is resolved by listening, with the courage to face the inner abysses, with a willingness to stop running. Because as long as you run, the pain runs after you. But when you stop, turn around and ask, what are you trying to tell me? The symptom becomes a message. Yes, pain has something to tell you. And as long as you try to get rid of it, it will continue to speak louder and louder. Because the unconscious is persistent. And when it is not heard, it manifests itself in the body, in relationships, in dreams. How many times have you dreamed that you were being chased, attacked, humiliated? These dreams are not random. They are reenactments of your inner drama. They are the ID trying to break through the ego's block to show what lies behind your normality. Freud said that dreams are the royal road to the unconscious. And this road is winding, symbolic, full of images that seem absurd. But each symbol conceals a desire, a pain, a memory. And if you learn to decipher your dreams, you will understand the logic of your suffering. You will see that you are not being punished, but summoned. Pain is not punishment. It is a call for analysis. And that is what we do here. We analyze, not to eliminate symptoms, but to listen to them, to decipher what your anxiety is trying to prevent you from realizing. Because anxiety, fear, anger, sadness, all of these are language. And what has no language becomes a symptom. When you say, I don't know why I feel so bad, nothing happened, pay attention. It is in that nothing that everything lives. It is in that silence that the unconscious acts. Because what has been repressed does not disappear, it comes back. And it comes back exactly where you most believe you are cured. That's why I tell you, no one else will hurt you when you stop hurting yourself by denying what you feel. When you embrace your pain, it will no longer need to scream. When you listen to your symptom, it will no longer need to repeat itself. And then, yes, you will be protected, not by armor, but by awareness. And awareness, my friend, is the only true form of freedom that you continue to believe that you need to defend yourself. That becoming impenetrable is the only way to avoid suffering again. But what if I told you that the more you try to shield yourself, the more vulnerable you become? That rigidity is a disguised form of fear, and that fear, when denied, chooses tortuous paths to manifest itself. See, what hurts the most is not the external blow, it's the internal reverberation. It's the echo of an old wound that never healed because it was never understood. When someone rejects you today, it's not just the present rejection that hurts. It's the rejection from childhood that is reactivated. When you feel inadequate, you are hearing the same voice that, at some point in your life, told you that you needed to be more, do more. Shut up more. What hurts you is not the other person. It is what the other person activates. And until you decipher what is being activated, you will continue to think that the problem is with others. But others are only acting out your unconscious script. They enter the scene to play roles you know by heart. The absent father, the critical mother, the favorite sibling, the teacher who humiliated you. Every current relationship carries shadows from the past. And it is this repetition that keeps the pain alive. But why do we repeat what hurts us? Because the unconscious does not seek pleasure. It seeks consistency with the initial pain. It seeks familiarity. And for the unconscious, familiar is synonymous with safe, even if it hurts. That's the trap. You get close to those who treat you badly, not because you like to suffer, but because you unconsciously believe that this time you will be able to control what destroyed you before, that this time you will be loved where you were rejected, valued where you were ignored, chosen where you were forgotten. This hope is the engine of repetition, but it never materializes, because the setting changes, but the script is the same. You project, distort, idealize, and when everything falls apart, it confirms your unconscious belief, I'm not good enough. And this repeats itself so many times that it becomes your identity. You cease to be who you are and become someone who suffers. The trauma becomes a lens, the symptom a companion. That's why freeing yourself is not breaking with others. It's breaking with this internal cycle. It's interrupting the repetition. It's looking inside and saying, I understand why I'm doing this, but now I can choose differently. And that takes courage, because it requires letting go of the illusion of control. It requires abandoning the idea that if I'm perfect, no one else will hurt me. It requires accepting that there are no guarantees, but there are choices. And choosing the truth is always the hardest choice. But it's the only one that heals. Do you want to stop suffering? Then stop denying your pain. Stop pretending that everything is fine when your body is screaming. Stop being silent when your soul begs for a voice. Stop saying, that's just how I am, when deep down, you know that this way of being was created to survive, not to live. This version of yourself, strong, controlled, distant, is a defense mechanism. And every defense mechanism, no matter how sophisticated, has a cost. It distances you from yourself. You know that emptiness you feel even when you're surrounded by people? That feeling of being out of place, disconnected, lost? That's not bad luck. That's the price of distancing yourself from your own essence. Because to keep up the mask, you had to repress your desires. You had to stifle your spontaneity. You had to fit your soul into tight molds of social acceptance. And the result of that is not security. It's exhaustion. What makes us sick is not feeling too much. It's feeling and repressing. It's wanting and blaming yourself. It's needing and pretending you don't. It's dreaming and calling it nonsense. Repression does not eliminate psychic content. It just pushes it into the basement of the mind. And what lives in the basement, my friend, returns in distorted forms. Insomnia, anxiety, phobias, compulsions. The symptom is a message from the unconscious saying, don't ignore me. Freud said that the ego is not master in its own house. And that is one of the most uncomfortable truths of the psyche. You think you are in control, but it is the unconscious that decides. It is the pattern that chooses. It is the trauma that reacts. And as long as the ego does not recognize this, it lives in war. A silent but devastating war. That is why analysis is not an exercise in logic, it is effective listening. It is the courage to let yourself be affected by your own words. It is stopping running away from what you feel. It is letting what has been silenced speak. Because only what still wants to be heard speaks. And only what still needs to be understood repeats itself. So I ask you, are you willing to listen to what scares you? Are you ready to look your own history in the eye, without filters, without excuses, without shortcuts? Because that is the price of freedom. And it is also the beginning of healing. When you understand why you choose those who reject you, why you blame yourself for feeling angry, why you can't say no without feeling selfish, you begin to free yourself. Not because you've become stronger, but because you've become more aware. And awareness is the only thing the unconscious respects. When you shine light on the shadow, it loses its power. When you name what you feel, the symptom dissolves. When you acknowledge desire, repression falls away. Nothing and no one can hurt you as much as your own ignorance of yourself. But likewise, nothing and no one can hurt you when you are whole. When you know what lies behind your fear, your anger, your escape. When you stop hiding from yourself, that true invulnerability is not the absence of pain. It is full presence in the face of pain. It is knowing that, no matter how much something hurts, you no longer need to destroy yourself because of it. You can feel without sinking. You can cry without judging yourself. You can refuse without guilt. You can be yourself without having to adapt to fit into someone else's affection. This is the greatest psychological revolution. No longer depending on external validation to exist. No longer asking permission to be who you are. And when that happens, my friend, pain ceases to be punishment. It becomes a passage. You are no longer a victim of your own story. You are the author of the next chapter. You ask yourself, but how can I trust myself if I was the one who put myself in this position of pain so many times? That's a legitimate question, and a courageous one, because it reveals the exact moment when the ego begins to distrust its own defenses. When the subject finally stops pointing the finger at the world and turns their gaze inward. And that is always the first step in the analytical process. You see, it's not about blaming yourself for past choices. It's about understanding that those choices were not made by a conscious, rational, autonomous you. They were made by parts of you shaped by pain, repetition, and the desire to repair the irreparable. You did not choose to be hurt, but you learned to expect love in the same way you received it, with conditions, with absence, with fear. And then you started calling love what made you restless, anxious, insecure, because that was the love you knew. That is why often care scares you. Kindness seems false. Stability bores you. Because the unconscious does not seek what is good. It seeks what is familiar. Even if it hurts. Even if it destroys. This is the paradox. You run away from everything that seems too good, because good sounds strange to you. And if it sounds strange, it's suspicious, because your reference point for attachment is pain. And so you gravitate toward those who repeat the script, someone who doesn't choose you fully, who makes you doubt yourself, who puts you in a perpetual state of trial, because that place, although uncomfortable, is familiar to you. And what is familiar seems safe, but it is not. It is just repeated. This repetition is not bad luck. It is psychic destiny until it becomes a conscious choice. And for that to happen, you need to get in touch with what has been repressed, with what you swore you had already overcome, but which still silently controls your relationships. Freud taught us that the ego is constantly in conflict between three forces. The ID, which desires, the superego, which prohibits, and reality, which limits. When this conflict becomes unbearable, the ego becomes ill. It creates symptoms to try to balance the tensions. Anxiety, for example, is an alarm, a desperate attempt by the ego to warn that it is being pushed too hard, that something of desire is escaping repression and threatening the established order. And what do? You take an anti-anxiety pill. You silence the alarm, but you don't put out the fire. The real cure is not in silencing the symptom. It is in listening to it, because every symptom has a message. And that message is often a request to reconnect with parts of yourself that you have abandoned. The inner child who was not seen, the teenager who swallowed the pain, the adult who survives by pretending that everything is fine. These parts don't disappear. They manifest themselves in the form of sabotage, impulsiveness, stagnation, but they are not enemies. They are messengers. And ignoring them is prolonging the cycle of pain. You say you want peace. But peace only comes when internal conflict is acknowledged, when you stop fighting yourself and start embracing your contradictions. When you understand that wanting love and being afraid of it is not incoherence, it is humanity. That desiring intimacy and pulling away from those who approach you is not madness. It is defense. These defenses are not flaws. They are attempts at protection. But over time, they begin to protect you from things you desire. They begin to prevent encounters, connection, pleasure, and you become divided. Part of you wants to go. Part of you holds back. Part of you loves. Part of you distrusts. Part of you moves forward. Part of you runs away. And in the midst of it all, you blame yourself. As if contradiction were a mistake, when, in fact, it is a sign that something profound is trying to emerge. Analysis does not eliminate these contradictions. It makes them conscious. And in doing so, it gives the subject back the power to choose. You no longer need to be held hostage by your patterns. You can recognize them, name them, and above all decide whether or not you want to continue living them. But be careful. The ego is afraid of freedom, because freedom requires responsibility. It requires giving up the role of victim. It requires stopping blaming your parents, your ex-partners, society, and taking ownership of your own story. With all its ugliness, beauty, and incompletness, this process hurts, because it is a mourning. A mourning for the illusion that one day someone would come to save you. A mourning for the childhood dream that if you were good enough, you would never be hurt again. A mourning for the fantasy that, with time, the pain would disappear on its own. No, the pain does not disappear. It transforms when it is heard, when it is welcomed without judgment, when it is integrated into the whole of your being. Because you are not just your pain, but it is also part of you. And as long as it is denied, it will control your life. Nothing. And no one can hurt you as much as your refusal to feel. But at the same time, nothing and no one will have power over you when you finally allow yourself to feel everything without fear, without shame, without rushing to get better. That is the wound that heals, the one that is looked at with honesty, the one that is named, the one that is crossed. And on the other side of it is not perfection. It is wholeness. It is the freedom to be who you are, with all your pain, desires, limits, and powers. And then you will understand no one else needs to hurt you, because you have already reconciled with the person who needed your care the most yourself. Have you ever noticed how the love you seek in others is, deep down, a cry for rescue? An ancient cry from parts of yourself that were once left behind. When you beg for attention, when you annul yourself so as not to be abandoned, when you accept less than you deserve, you are not just negotiating affection. You are trying to rediscover something you lost long ago, when you did not yet know how to protect yourself. And the cruelest thing is that, often, you look for someone who has the same profile as the person who hurt you. As if, unconsciously, you wanted to recreate the pain so that, this time, you could overcome it. You fall in love with those who ignore you. You give yourself to those who don't listen to you. You strive for those who don't choose you. And you repeat, this time will be different, but it isn't. Because the stage changes, but the characters remain the same. The unconscious is a faithful scriptwriter. It repeats itself until you realize it, until the pain becomes unbearable enough that you stop looking for someone to blame and start looking for meaning. That's when analysis becomes inevitable. When suffering ceases to be just pain and becomes a question. Why, after all, do you keep putting yourself in situations that drain you? Why do you always need to prove your worth? Why do you feel guilty when you distance yourself from those who hurt you? The answer lies in the deepest roots of your psychic makeup, in your primary bonds, in the marks left by those who should have loved you and didn't know how. Freud called this compulsive repetition, the tendency to relive traumatic experiences in an attempt to master them. But this mastery never happens because it is not about strength, but about awareness. Healing does not come from overcoming pain, but from understanding it. And that is only possible when you stop running away. See, you run away when you rationalize. Too much. When you say it's just a phase, it was nothing, I can handle it. You run away when you distract yourself all the time, when you keep yourself busy to the point of exhaustion, when you fill your schedule so you don't have to deal with the emptiness. You run away when you silence your anger, when you swallow your tears, when you say, everything's fine, with red eyes from lack of sleep. But the unconscious does not respect escape. It invades. It appears in the body, in dreams, in slips of the tongue. It imposes itself because it needs to be heard. And the more you ignore it, the louder it screams. And its scream is your symptom. That pattern you don't understand. That feeling of always being on the sidelines. That pain that comes back even after you swear you are cured. You are not weak. You are divided between what you feel and what you think you should feel. Between what you want and what you think you can want. Between what you want to say and what you have learned to keep quiet. This division is what Freud called psychic conflict, and all suffering is born there, in the abyss between who you are and who you have learned to be in order to survive. But the good news is that this abyss can be crossed, not with effort, but with listening. Not with willpower, but with emotional honesty. When you start allowing yourself to feel what you feel, without filters, without censorship, without shame, something changes. What was opaque becomes clear. What was heavy becomes understandable. What was pain becomes truth. And the truth, however hard it may be, sets you free. Because lies make you sick. The lie that you are strong all the time. The lie that you don't need anyone. The lie that you've already overcome everything. These lies imprison you in versions of yourself that are not yours. And maintaining a mask requires energy. Energy that could be used to create love, live, but that you spend to sustain armor. That is why true freedom is not about not feeling. It is about being able to feel everything and still remain whole. It is knowing that you can be frustrated and still love. That you can feel anger without ceasing to be good. That you can say no and still be worthy of affection. It's abandoning the idea that you have to be perfect to be loved. True love begins when you stop negotiating who you are. When you choose yourself even if it costs you someone else's approval. When you say, I can't take it anymore, and for the first time, someone listens, even if that someone is yourself. You have a right to be angry, to tiredness, to sadness, to doubt, to contradiction. And above all, you have a right to your story, with all the pain and beauty it carries. Because there is no trauma that cannot be transformed when it is recognized. There is no pattern that cannot be broken when it is understood. There is no pain that cannot be overcome when it is felt fully, with awareness and acceptance. This is the path, not that of overcoming, but that of integration. You no longer need to fight what you feel. You need to invite that pain to talk. Ask it what it wants to show you. And in doing so, it dissolves. Because pain deep down just wanted to be heard. And when it is heard, the symptom loses its function. The compulsion loses its power. The pattern loses its meaning. And you can finally live not as someone who survives, but as someone who chooses. Not as someone who waits for the next blow, but as someone who is no longer afraid to look inside. Nothing. And no one can ever hurt you like they did before. Because now you know, the power of pain is not in what others do, but in what you don't want to see. And when you see it, everything changes. Not because the world has changed, but because you have finally awakened. You've made it this far. And if you have, it's because something inside you already understands. What hurts the most is not being abandoned by others. but abandoning yourself. You've been adapting, molding yourself, shrinking to fit into places too small for your soul. And every time you did that, you left a piece of yourself behind. Now you miss it, but you don't know exactly what. You feel an emptiness, a longing for yourself, an absence that no one can fill. And of course they can't, because this absence is not external affection. It is internal presence, authenticity, connection with what is essential in you, but has been silenced. What you were before you needed to please others. Before you learned that, to be loved, you had to be good, useful, pleasant, strong. All of these are masks. Disguises created by an ego that only wanted to survive. But now that you have survived, you can live. And to live is to risk being whole. Not perfect, not immune, not unattainable, but real. And emotional reality is complex, contradictory, full of nuances. No one is only light or only shadow. We are all crossed by desires and fears, by guilt and love, by joy and pain. Psychic maturity is not about choosing a side. It is about enduring coexistence. You can love and feel anger. You can forgive and walk away. You can desire and say no. You can be afraid and still go on. When you integrate these contradictions, you don't break. On the contrary, you become stronger. Because true strength comes from recognizing your vulnerability, from honest contact with what you are going through, from respect for yourself, even when you are not everything you would like to be. This is a central point. The superego, that part of you that internalizes the demands of the world, relentlessly berates you. You should be better. You should have overcome this. You should have reacted differently. And you believe that voice. And you blame yourself. And you mistreat yourself. And that only distances you further from your true essence. The superego doesn't want you to live. It wants you to conform. But living is not conforming. Living is overflowing. It is occupying space with your truth. It is allowing yourself to make mistakes without hating yourself for it. It is stopping measuring yourself with other people's rulers. Because each ruler was made to measure a different pain. And your story deserves its own measure. Remember, you are not weak because you feel. You are strong because you feel and keep going. You are not weak because you fall. You are human. And you get up, and you reinvent yourself. And little by little, you discover that you no longer need to hurt yourself to feel alive. That you no longer need to be rejected to confirm an old belief. That you no longer need to repeat the drama because you have finally written a new script. This new script begins when you ask yourself, sincerely, what am I trying to heal with this suffering? And then, why do I keep giving my energy to those who only know how to hurt me? And above all, what still makes me think I don't deserve peace? These questions don't have simple answers, because they touch on something very old. Something that may have started when you didn't even know how to talk yet. When you learned that crying bothers people, that wanting too much is scary, that being yourself can cost you someone else's love. And so you hid. You created acceptable versions of yourself. And you survived. But now that you're here, you can do things differently. For the first time, you can let that child inside you be seen. The one who wanted nothing more than a hug, to be listened to be validated. The one who cried alone in their room, who kept quiet so as not to be punished, who smiled to be accepted. That child still lives inside you, and they're still waiting for someone to come and get them. And that person can only be you. It's not too late. It's never too late to find yourself, to reconnect with your soul, to take off the masks, lay down your weapons, let go of control, to look in the mirror and say, I see myself, I accept myself, I embrace myself. When spoken with truth, This phrase is more powerful than any external approval because it breaks the cycle. It breaks the repetition. It interrupts the unconscious. Packed with pain. And then you begin to live. No longer as someone who needs to prove something, but as someone who finally allows themselves to be. Life ceases to be a battlefield and becomes a space for creation. Relationships cease to be arenas of deprivation and become encounters of wholeness. You stop reacting and start choosing. Nothing and no one will hurt you like before. Because what hurt you most was the denial of yourself. And now you have allowed yourself to be. Now you know yourself. And those who know themselves can protect themselves without closing themselves off. They can love without annulling themselves. They can trust without abandoning themselves. Healing, my friend, is not about eliminating suffering. It is about knowing what it means. It is about being able to say, I know where this comes from, and I know I can do things differently. When that happens, the unconscious no longer needs to trap you in repetition, because it has been heard. And when the unconscious is heard, the symptom loses its function. Yes, you can be free, but freedom requires awareness. It requires going through the pain, not running away from it. And if you've made it this far, it's because you're already going through it. Because something in you no longer accepts living anesthetized. Because you know, living truly hurts, but it heals. And that is why now you can say, nothing and no one will ever hurt me like they did before. Because finally, I am back to myself. The pain was your teacher. The symptom was your guide. Suffering was the gateway. Now you see with the eyes of consciousness. Now you choose yourself not out of revenge, but out of truth. Freedom is not the absence of wounds, but the absolute presence of yourself. This script touched something inside you. Share it with those who also need to remember that it is possible to be reborn. We'll see you at the next session. And until then, keep going. Listen to what hurts. Decipher what repeats itself. Honor what you feel, because what you are aware of no longer controls you.